forward. Things are coming at me. Welcome. How many of you are visitors and not Georgetown Village members? Great. We're so glad you're here. We're here. We feel like we're a really well-kept secret that we don't mean to keep. But we are, we're an active community. We have.
You need to talk louder.
I need to talk louder. Okay, that's okay. I can hear the echo here.
So stand on this side.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of reverb. Much better.
There you go.
There you go.
And talk louder right into the mic.
Thank you. There we go. Nobody ever says I'm quiet, so how's that? We are a membership organization. We do everything from fun social events like today. We have book group, we have mahjong, we have exercise class, we do cocktails. Pat was just talking about my husband who does cocktail sessions. I think some of you have come. And we do a lot of fun things. And we also provide services to folks in the Georgetown community and nearby who need help with snow shoveling or getting to a doctor's appointment. So, we do that with 1 full-time staff and 2 less than full-time staff. And I think we're amazing. So please spread the word that we're here. I will make a small pitch and just say, although we do charge membership fees, our membership fees only cover 1/3 of our budget. And all the things that we do are a result of you in the community and all our members and all our friends. So thank you. I am so excited about tonight. Pamela Johnson is my neighbor. I won't say exactly where she lives, but she lives on East, just because then you'll go knock on her door and want to talk to her a lot because she's a really interesting person. She lives on P Street and she came to me and showed me this beautiful product. I won't give it away. My day that she wrote with Miss Anna here, Anna Eleanor Fierst, and it is a diary with all sorts of facts about Eleanor Roosevelt. And the two of these folks and Faya did a lot of research about Eleanor, found some things I have never heard of, and a lot of things about Eleanor's life here in the DC area, which I got really excited about. So Pamela and I talked about bringing an event here to Georgetown Village. She and Anna were gracious enough to agree to do this. And I'm going to turn this over to her. I'm going to send it to Pamela. And I'm really looking forward to this session. And I want to make sure you save your questions. We are going to have questions and answers. I've already heard one question about what Eleanor drank, alcohol she drank. I don't know the answer to that. But someone asked me that already. So Pamela, let me give this to you.
Thank you so much, Judith. And Judith, as you can imagine, is a great neighbor. And it's wonderful to be back here. I've been here only one time before, and that was for the cocktails. And I've been allowed a little bit of wine tonight. Anyway, a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for the invitation. And we're here to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt and my colleague, Anna Fierst, who has amazing credentials to this. She is the chair of the Eleanor Roosevelt Center at Val Hill, which is Eleanor Roosevelt's home in Hyde Park. She's the vice president of the National Women's Foundation, formerly the president of the Women's National Democratic Club. And Eleanor Roosevelt was actually the first national member of that club. And she also happens to be the great-granddaughter of Eleanor Roosevelt. So we have lots of stories about, from a family perspective, but also from a history perspective. I'll just tell you a little bit about the National Women's Foundation. We were actually started in 1991 to preserve and celebrate women's history, to preserve the Whittemore House, which is at New Hampshire and Q Street, if you know that, and also to pass it along to the next generation. One of the things when I became president that I learned, I went to the national meeting of the National Council of Social Studies. It was in Texas that year, and it was the year of the centennial of the 19th Amendment. So I was going through the exhibits and looking at, is that, okay, sorry. We were going through the exhibits and looking at them. And I thought, well, let me find out more about suffrage and about the passage of the 19th Amendment. I started leafing through the textbooks. Guess what? There were no women. And it was really stunning. And so I kept looking and there were, and I talked to a teacher. She was actually a DC history teacher of the year. And she said, oh yeah, 71% of the illustrations in textbooks are white men. And I just read some statistics this week that there are only 8% of the illustrations are women at all. So it really, so I got interested in this problem. I thought, well, from an educational point of view, we're trying to give young women a sense of what they can do and what they can be in their lives, and they never see any images. That's a problem. So we came up with this idea of doing planners and calendars with featuring women, and we've been distributing them ever since to the DC schools, to the social studies teachers and students. And they've really been, it's literally hundreds of women who've been in these planners. But this last year, this is strange. Do you have to keep twisting it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. This last year, we decided to do one on Eleanor Roosevelt, and we took two of the interns and went up, thanks to Anna, we went up to Hyde Park. I will just share some of the others, women firsts, about women who were in science and technology and education and sports, women's organizations. There are a huge number of women's organizations that have been founded in this area, the Delta Sigma Thetas, League of Women Voters, tons of groups in this area, but not necessarily well known. And then DC Women, which was fascinating, we did last year, really looking at the history of women in DC. Let's go to the next, well, before we go on, I just want to acknowledge Anna Kowsley, who helped put this planner together, and we're sort of interspersing this with stories that we know about Eleanor Roosevelt and with the images from the planner itself.
Thank you, Pamela. I'm just going to answer the question that some people ask me. I'll show you Q&A if I haven't explained this clearly enough. That's the first question that comes up. So how am I related to the little girl that's standing there in the picture? And that is my mother. She's 99. She still lives in this area. And she doesn't do public appearances anymore. But anyway, this picture I love because it's outside of East 65th Street, which were the double part of the double house that you see one stoop. The double townhouses that Sarah Delano built for Eleanor and Franklin as a gift for the newlywed. There was 1906, yeah, I think it was built in 1907, 8. Excuse me. This is when he had been elected governor. He was towards the end of his about 1930. My mother's about 3 years old there. And you can see if you look how he's standing, and he had beautiful shoes, I have to say. Always look at those shoes. Wow. But he is gripping the handrail behind him quite tightly. And you can see behind his left leg there, a little ramp, and there's a double, what do you call it, bars, so that he could hoist himself up the stairs. And I don't know who the characters are in the background, but she was about to go off to a nursery school. I don't know whether she was going to the Todd Hunter School, where my great-grandmother taught. But the other picture there is up to the left is Eleanor in high school when she was at Allenswood, which is outside of London. It's where Wimbledon is now. And that was really the formative years for her. That was her only formal education, and very, very intense, run by a French woman, Madame Marie Souvestre, who as I've looked into her teaching styles and her political background, she really was kind of a modern day Bernie Sanders. I mean, she, whoops, sorry, my hand's away from this thing. And here we go, the mic. she really was very progressive in the sense of asking her students to think about racism, all kinds of, colonialism issues that no one in polite society talked about. But she expected her students to be able to really be well versed in that and have debates. And Eleanor did very well. Of course, she spoke French before she got there. So everything was in French at the school, which I think automatically catapulted her up to the top of the class. The lower left picture is probably about the time when they were living on R Street. And he was serving as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And R Street, there was a famous anarchist incident. The house across the street from them blew up and they were living there. And this is now occupied, it's still there. The Malian embassy is in that house. So if you walk down, it's right before you get to the circle, where the block before it feeds into, is it Sheridan Circle there? And then the other, so skipping to the bottom right, it's a little bit blocked. That's my uncle, and again, my mother. This is the playground setup they had. They moved into the White House. My great grandmother's dressed to go horseback riding. She kept a horse at Fort Myers, and it would be brought to Rock Creek, and she'd have the horseback. I mean, I don't know how many times a week or month she did this, but this was a very casual playground setup, but they had a sandbox over there, and it's a little bit less elaborate than what the Obama girls had when they first moved there. So I'm going to see what is on the next slide here. And I think Pamela, you wanted to talk about this image, right?
Thank you. It's very interesting. So so Eleanor Roosevelt comes back to New York from school, and she gets married, but she starts, and she has, as you see, a number of children, but she also started to get interested in the community. And in New York City, particularly people who are moving into the settlement houses and who are on the Lower East Side, many of them were German immigrants, Italian immigrants, and were living in really very bad straits. So she got involved with a settlement house called Rivington and taught children there. She also got involved with various organizations. A number of women were getting more and more involved with their communities. Jane Addams, Hull House in Chicago. The one on the upper left, that actually is the League of Women Voters. She was a member of that, but wasn't actively involved in suffrage until much later. That's actually a picture of her voting in 1936. But she started to get more involved in the in the 20s, but she wasn't in the parades and so on in DC for that. But again, she got involved with economic issues, with working women. This is the Women's Trade Union League on the bottom right. She also got, and Rose Schneiderman, who was working. Another thing that's interesting, she was involved in the Junior League, but does anyone know what the Junior League was named in the early 1900s? The Junior League for Settlements, and was very much a social-oriented organization that was really working, again, to help these communities. This is also not far from this is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Many of you may know that story. She was not there at the fire. She was certainly in that area at that time, but Frances Perkins was at the fire, at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. But for people who don't know this, these were garment workers, and so the bosses could make sure that the women wouldn't take away anything or wouldn't escape on a break. They locked the doors, and so when a fire started, these women were trapped inside the building, and it was an absolutely horrifying fire. Many, more than 100 women were killed. Frances Perkins was influenced for the rest of her life. She, of course, went on. She first went up to Albany and joined the governor's staff. Al Smith was the governor at the time. Later went to the White House and became the first Secretary of Labor, the first woman in the president's cabinet, and person who was largely responsible for starting Social Security.
All right. I love this image because I actually have a friend of mine whose mother might be, no, she's not in this picture. She's very proud of the fact that her mother was in the press corps, had her late in life because she's about my age, and she was in the Eleanor's press corps in the war years. The top image is from her My Day column, which she started, and just sort of to get back to the planner for a second, many of the quotes, I'd say 2/3 of them are from one of her My Day columns, which just started in 1935. 6 days a week, it went out roughly to about 90 newspapers. She didn't stop writing it until tapered down to 3 days a week after, during the late 50s. But she kept it up until a couple months before she died. Because she was still traveling and still meeting with people and still talking about, her involvement at that point with the Kennedy administration. So this is actually My Day. This is just a little glimpse of what it looked like typically in a newspaper. This is some of us remember, my father had a typewriter similar to the one that's pictured in the lower right. This is the lower right image. This is still I'm on the top left there is from Meet the Press, which she regularly appeared on that show. And then the bottom left here is a great cartoon, which she loved. In fact, she had got the cartoonist to give her the original, persuaded him to do this. And it's hard to read from the back, but it said the quotation above the cartoon is, "But it would make such a nice scoop if you'd only tell me, Franklin." And actually, it was quite the reverse in a lot of ways because she used, before polling was done the way it's done now, and these were testing out ideas for the various agencies that were being developed during the New Deal. So she would float these ideas sometimes in My Day to see what kind of reaction she'd get. And if it was just all, hate mail would flood in by the hundreds, and she got hundreds of letters a day, it was something that was maybe quietly shelved. So, but this is probably this picture, the big picture is about 1934, no. Yeah, she started the press corps right away. She had her first press conference about 2 months after she became first lady. So it's hard to say, this might be 1934, but there were generally, it was an incredible thing because these were only women only. And that meant that these women could keep their jobs with major newspapers because newspapers were laying off journalists as much as they could, and guess who was first fired? So if they had a woman there who was had her the ear of the ear of the first lady, and she was running around all over the country. And the fun thing is that the big news of the day was, when would beer and wine be served at the White House? Well, they were the first to know it, and they were the first to break the news. It was quite a coup. So these press corps women, as she continued, she had, I think, how many, 300 and some press conferences by the time she left the White House, 300 plus. I have the figure written down somewhere, but that's how frequently and how much she was in touch with the press. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. And here we have, I just want to read it out, Pamela, Eyes on America, because the up there, but this is a page from the planner.
Now, the next line is Eleanor Roosevelt and the faces of the Great Depression. As Anna's been talking, she traveled a lot. In fact, she was traveling 40,000 miles a year. She felt that it was very important for herself and the president to understand what was going on in America. And so, we'll talk about it more in a minute, but she's up there, going down into a cold. She also worked with photographers and artists who were documenting what was happening in the country. And so some of these extraordinary images were things that were created at that time. And whether it's Dorothea Lange's just incredible picture of poverty, Gordon Parks, his photograph of this charwoman who is, an American citizen, but just making it. And this is at a Triple C camp, and there's the Dust Bowl. So This was during the Great Depression, and she actually encouraged people to document it and to bring it to the attention. And you think about today, when there are people who are really suffering, that we're not as aware of what's going on very often because people just don't cover those stories.
I just want to mention a couple of things that, that people have asked me about. Civilian Conservation Corps, this was a scene from the South. It was segregated racially, the corps themselves. This is obviously an African-American corps, and they were, I don't know where they were, all look like they have hoes, in their hands. The other thing I love about this mine, going into the coal mine, is that she she has kind of a funny little hard hat on there, but you can see there's a miner's lamp there. And and of course, we know that the Gordon, this is a very famous photograph. So I'm gonna move ahead. Okay, this is, well, I'll let Pamela and I might have some points to make about this. But in all of these travels, she was not good at accepting Secret Service protection. She was a very independent-minded woman, as you would imagine. She had a just a divinely handsome Secret Service agent, I have to say. And there are some home movies on the internet. You can see these things that they were doing. But he said, look, if you're gonna do this and keep giving us the slip, you have to learn how to use a pistol. So this is up in the Adirondacks in an area called Chazy Lake. I'm not sure where that is. I should know, but it was on one of their tours up there, and he found a good range for her. And there is a quote in the planner. She says, if I must do it, I do know how to use a pistol if I'm forced, or something like that. But these pants, this was not a ladylike way to dress back in the day. Newsboy pants that she often had a tie on. So, but she was told to keep a pistol in her car because she always. Now, they found out much later it was mostly or quite often not loaded. So what could yeah, and here's the blow up of the going down into the mine. She spent 2 hours down inside the mine, came back up, and then gave another 45-minute lecture to the miners gathered around about workers' rights. And so, and then this is the other one. This is my favorite cartoon, which many people know about. And this actually came out before, so maybe the cartoon gave her the idea. But this is a New Yorker cartoon that some of you might have seen. For gosh sakes, here comes Mrs. Roosevelt, it says. So, and then I'm gonna give this back. Pamela, my talk, okay. So we're trading off here. This is a really beautiful image we actually got from Getty because she is engaged with this child. This is at the Brewster Homes, which was as I say, the first federally funded housing development for Black residents in the mid-30s in Detroit. This caused a huge backlash, by the way. There were actually riots on the part of the white residents who said that they deserved these houses, this housing complex, whatever it was. But she went up there and was accepting flowers from this child. And of course, there was, a lot of hate mail, of course, as you can imagine, resulted from these kinds of images, which went out all over in the press. But she was, her bravery in doing the things that she knew would attract a lot of enmity, to put it mildly. It always still astounds me. But I'm gonna go on here.
Can we go back just 1 minute to
Want to go back to that?
just that one? There was something about the way that she connected with people. And you see this in this photograph, but this is, her eyes are going directly to this little child. And you can see that they have connected and have formed a relationship. And you see this in many photographs of Eleanor Roosevelt, is that she just absolutely looks at you and is communicating. So let's go to the next one. And you look at the top left is Mary McLeod Bethune. And she had the same relationship. There's actually another photograph where they're actually looking at each other. And there are many pictures of her looking at people very directly in that way. But you can see the kinds of relationships that she had and established with a wide variety of people, an extraordinary variety. She had a number of roles as a champion and was a true champion of civil rights. In the Roosevelt administration, the first time you had African Americans coming into the government, there was a quote, black cabinet. And she was the chair of the black cabinet. She was the only woman. Bethune, excuse me, Mary Bethune, who's the top left there. Mary Bethune, who was the middle bottom row. And she was the first woman, and she was very heavily supported in that role and in her other roles in the government by Roosevelt. One of the most famous stories was what happened on the mall at Easter Sunday in 1939, when the story evolved because they wanted to have a concert with Marian Anderson. And we'll hear this in a minute that she had also been singing at the White House when she was as the guest and at the invitation of Mrs. Roosevelt. But they wanted to have this integrated concert with Marian Anderson in DC, and she was a phenomenal singer. And they tried different locations. They finally hit on the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution on 19th and Constitution. And it was being planned, and then the DAR said, no, we can't have an integrated concert. And so they pulled back. Eleanor immediately resigned from the DAR and wrote a letter saying why. So she was always out there. She was always being very clear. But then she talked to some of the people in the cabinet, and Harold Ickes, who was the Secretary of Interior, said, well, why don't we do it on the mall and do it at the Lincoln Memorial? And so this is this incredible picture, 75,000 people on the Washington Mall. She's singing in front of Lincoln, and it was just an extraordinary event. I think about this as when this sort of sacred space for our democracy was established in this country. I mean, later on, you had you had the March Up for Jobs. You think of all of the events that have taken place in that, but this was the first one. It was integrated. It was just absolutely breathtaking. If we can probably figure out later and play My Country 'Tis of Thee for you. It's just one of the most beautiful things you'll ever hear. Interestingly, this was 1939, Easter Sunday. 1945, she was invited to join the NAACP board, and she did. And they had a meeting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. So this is the meeting, and she's actually addressing the board of the NAACP here. Do you want to tell the White House story?
Well, yeah.
So I think she had already sung at the White House before this concert, but then the King and Queen came to visit, and about like 4 or 5 months later, and she said, well, can you come and sing for the King and Queen? And she did. And that may have been, I haven't had time to research this thoroughly, but probably was the first person of color or a Black person to perform at the White House in a professional capacity. And so that's, the film of this or clip of this plays on the one that I would love to share if we can find it, plays at the FDR Library in their welcoming film clip if you go up there to Hyde Park. Anyway, I'm gonna move along. And this gets back to, it's unfortunate that her image is blocked out by the screen, but she is standing, as you can see, at Gila River in Rivers, Arizona, which I don't know if this still is there. I know that there are a few other of the Japanese internment camps that are still, you can go visit them in California. she was very, very opposed and had a lot of, struggled really a lot with this, with FDR, because this is, as soon as Pearl Harbor happened, it started to become a big issue. There were some bizarre sort of, I know from, personal stories, you know, there were a couple of random attacks in Oregon, for example, in a little town called Brookings, by a Japanese soldier. But, you know, largely it was all hysteria, and there was this pushback. FDR, of course, it was his decision, but it was mainly Californians who were the most, I really think just kind of the level of paranoia about, you know, the fifth column and Japanese, and it just, so it became kind of a gathering storm, and she kept working on this and hoping this would not happen, but of course, as we all know, it did. Once this order was passed, she then went on whenever she could to speak to people out west, and she had, by that time, my mother had moved to Seattle. So she was out there at various times and would use the opportunity to talk to people about the camps and what, you know, this is something that I don't know whether she said, she would not oppose the army outright. She was very careful about not crossing certain lines. But she would talk to people about what the Japanese Americans were doing for the war, to just draw attention to the situation and get people to think about what was happening here. But yeah, it was a shameful time in our history, and she did her best, I think, to push back without crossing that line.
By the way, somebody should be able to take that last fall.
Yeah, I don't know if we can.
Well, so if you let me get hold of your computer for a second, I didn't want to take it away from you to talk.
No.
Sorry, so give me a second and I will be happy to do that. Anybody have any questions while I'm doing it? Now's a good opportunity.
Yes,
It's not
yes.
a question, but I don't know if there's a little appendix to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory that
Yes.
people might find interesting. Everybody was in an uproar, we know that, and of course there was a lawsuit. And at the time of the lawsuit, the plaintiffs put on one of the women that was remained alive, but to tell the stories, and she went on about how the screams and the cries and the desperation went on and on and on and on. It was really a heartbreaking story. And then the defense lawyer got up and told her, tell it again. And she repeated the same thing verbatim. And it was so, the jury was so turned off by that, so upset that she'd been so clearly, absolutely coached to the point where she had memorized. And she said the same thing again, except didn't you mean to say and instead of or in that sentence? And they went on to acquit the owners of that.
Wow.
What a story. What a story. Wow, here you go. You can have this back. I think I fixed it.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, because I was itching to get up here.
Yes, thanks.
Sorry.
She was cut off when the Japanese.
Yes. Can you go back one slide just so we can see that?
This mouse not going back. I'm sorry. These buttons aren't working.
Either.
Yes.
May I? I think what we'll have to do is shrink this and go back. You know what we can do, if you're okay with this?
Yeah.
What we can do is at the end, maybe recycle through the slides so people who didn't see this can see that.
Okay.
Why don't we do it that way?
No, we have to go back here.
There we go.
Okay.
Oh, that,
No, no, that.
Okay,
well,
Next one.
we skipped this one, we didn't get to this one, remember?
Yeah.
We didn't talk about this.
Right.
Thank you.
Sorry, yes. Okay. After World War II, of course, the United Nations was developed, and Eleanor Roosevelt was named by Truman to be one of the member of the U.S. delegation to the UN. She was the only woman in the delegation, and And she was, and actually there are very, very few women in the UN. Yeah, eight, and it's a 6 or 8 out of 800 people at the UN, so. The, but she was elected to the Commission on Human Rights, to chair the Commission on Human Rights. And there were 6 women who, and these were the 6 women on the Commission on Human Rights. They worked with the 50 countries, 58 countries, and wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it was an extraordinary thing. She skillfully brought all of these countries together to agree on things like the equality of men and women around the world, of all men and women around the world. An extraordinary document. And it still lasts. It's still the statement of the importance of human rights for all of us. She's holding it there, and this, of course, is the monument we have in Washington to her down by the river. Then,
I just wanted to read something briefly from, this is a cousin of mine who's actually Eleanor's niece, and she wrote this memo up back in around 2000 before she wrote it to my mother. It's a whole string of reports titled "Welcome to Before I Forget." So these were letters based on letters that she was receiving from her Aunt Eleanor. So she said sometimes she found herself, this is on the ship going over to London, falling asleep as she tried to study the verbose reports. Once she asked a gentleman from the State Department to translate a document into something she could understand, a language she didn't understand. He said, "Mrs. Roosevelt, I don't understand these words. I don't think anyone is supposed to." So in London, she met with the king and queen and met old friends. Lady Reading wanted to talk about the problems of the world's Jewish population. And then when the delegation met to assign their members to specific committees, they assigned my aunt to Committee 3. Obviously, the men thought an appointment to the committee scheduled to deal with humanitarian, social, and cultural matters would be a safe place to put their controversial female member. Surely she could do no harm to any of their political careers from there. Well, little did they know. So back in New York, after the initial meeting in London, it turned out that one of the jobs the Economic and Social Council had assigned to Committee 3 was to set up an 18-nation commission on human rights. The commission's first task would be to draft a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At their first meeting, by unanimous acclaim, they chose my aunt to be their chairperson. There's a couple more sentences. On the second day, she was 4 minutes late and apologized, saying the New York subway had let her down. During the second week, she came down with a case of shingles, but no delegate ever knew about it. No. They called her their slave driver. She was kept them all on going.
she would tell people, we're not going to argue about comedy. Next one, yes. Well, we were talking earlier about vaccines. Obviously, she had an extraordinary experience with polio, and she was very supportive of the development of.
What?
I was talking with Brad.
Oh.
He thinks he has food poisoning from lunch.
Oh, no.
So he's waiting to hear from Sonia.
One of our Zoom people is talking.
Okay.
Go mute everybody on Zoom.
Yeah.
So she actually launched the March of Dimes, and maybe some of you contributed to that as a child, or collected money for UNICEF to go to the March of Dimes and help develop. She was a real leader with this, and even it turns out that the young Richard Nixon, when he was a congressman, got very involved and supported the March of Dimes, and supported the development of the Salk vaccine. And of course, as you all have benefited, polio was eradicated in 1979 in the United States. Let's see. So she was close to all of these presidents, from Theodore Roosevelt, who was a cousin, and uncle, sorry. Through Nixon, through Truman, who was the one who had named her to the UN, you're supposed to be talking about this.
This is a scene there in New York in a hotel, but prior to that, or perhaps after this, I see he has under his arm, President Kennedy, FDR Speaks, which is a volume of LPs that several people have given me these sets of LPs. And I go, what am I gonna do with them? Anyway, so they had it kind of coming to terms with their relationship, which was rocky. She did not like the fact that he had not come out in front of the McCarthy years. He was very, very cagey about saying, no, Joe McCarthy is not a good guy, and here's why. Turns out, actually, the McCarthys, the Kennedys were socialists. So that I didn't know until very recently. Also, there was a bit of, I think, leftover bitterness about his father and Joe Kennedy's role as a very strong isolationist in the late 30s. And he was the ambassador to the court of St. James. He had to be essentially fired. So I think there was, and brought back because he was, that was, obviously we were trying to edge the country into accepting that we would have to go to war. And she also just didn't kind of feeling of him. She thought maybe he was just not, progressive enough. And I guess his stance on civil rights was a little waffly. And so anyway, they had a series of get-togethers, and he finally convinced her to back the ticket. In 1960, as we know, it was nip and tuck with Nixon. So I like to think that, and she worked very hard. When she accepted him, she said, okay. And she worked very hard to bring out the African-American vote where Black population could vote in big numbers. That probably didn't apply to the South, but in Chicago, for example, it really did help bring Illinois over to the Kennedy ticket. So I like to think she prevented Nixon from being president for a few years.
Well, one of the things that Kennedy asked her to do was to chair a commission on the status of women. And this was her last professional job. And these are some of the women who are on the commission. Dorothy Height is there, the president of Radcliffe. This is Esther Peterson on the right-hand side. But they did a very thorough review of the status of women and what could be done to enhance it. They made a number of recommendations. She passed away, and Esther Peterson, who had been her deputy, chaired the commission and brought it to a closure. And so here she is presenting the commission report to President Kennedy. A year later, there's actually a quite similar photograph because they stayed in working and started actually working on legislation for the Equal Pay Act, which came out of the status of this commission as well. So that was one of the reforms in employment, education, and so on that came out of this work. Well, this is, I believe, the last slide, and so we're very open to questions because what we discovered is this is just scratching the surface. And My Day archives are actually over at George Washington University. They're also online. And all of these columns you can actually read any day, what happened in 1939 on December 3rd. And it's there, and they're full of quotes and so on. We actually distribute these planners. The reason we make them is to bring them into schools. And so these have gone to all of the public schools and social studies teachers in DC, and digital copies are available and so on. That's one of the things we want to do is get this information into schools about her and about other women. I actually asked one of our guests here tonight what she knew about Eleanor Roosevelt and where she had learned about. And she said, "Oh, I learned about her in 4th grade." I said, "Well, where did you go to school in 4th grade? Because that would be very unusual in the United States." She said, "Oh, in Trinidad."
So,
Amazing. No, I just,
I just want to say it's been a real joy to work on this planner with you, Pamela. And you've had a great time, and I still learn something new about, my great grandmother about once a week. Some country that she visited that I never knew about, or, it's just some person that she knew who's impacted her life. So anyway, and we happy to take questions.
And let me just jump in, I can
Sure.
hear me, right? Let me just jump here and say, we're gonna do questions and answers, and we'll moderate that, and then we'll have to stop so you can talk to Anna and to my friend Pamela. They are too shy, but I'm not. If you wanna learn more about Eleanor, you can come up and look at this, but I'll just say, if you buy one for $20, they have been generous enough to say, we'll give $15 back to the foundation, who will get these planners in the hands of young people through your donation, and $5 of that will go, of your $20 will go to Georgetown Village. So, thank you. We didn't expect that, so thank you, thank you, thank you. So after questions and answers, if you're interested, come up here, you can take a little look, we can talk to Pam.
copy here.
Yeah, it's, I have one, it's fascinating.
Or there's one here, yeah, there's. a
Yeah,
copy
yeah,
of
we
it.
can pass a few rounds. Let me pass a few rounds while we start the questions. Questions for Pamela or Anna right here? And stand up and talk loud, so we don't have to deal with that silly microphone.
So I read that your grandmother was an amazing gift giver,
Mm-hmm.
and that she kept track of all the gifts that she gave people. Can you expand on that? And do you know anything about the way that she would plan out her gifts to people?
Yeah, so, well, there was a huge Christmas, piles of Christmas presents at Valkill for people who could come to Valkill. We lived in upstate New York at the time, so what she did for great grandchildren and grandchildren she didn't see was we were, as children, we were enrolled in a junior scholastic league or something like that. I'm not getting the name right, but it is like book club for kids, right? Book of the month club. We got a book every year. We lived in a rural area, but all her grandchildren, we all got these books. And even years later, even after she died, we were getting these books. So she had planned in advance, I think. She wasn't into elaborate gifts. And I think some gifts, one odd thing that we have things in our house that were actually state gifts to the White House. Back then, the family presidents did not have to, the Roosevelts owned those gifts that people brought. That changed in the 50s. So there are a lot of things, most of these things have by now been donated to the FDR library. But in terms of, I suspect sometimes she passed along some of those gifts to family members. Gloves, there's this very sweet story about my husband's aunt who came here as a refugee from Germany and worked in a glove factory. And she sent her a pair of gloves to Mrs. Roosevelt. We have the letter, they have the letter, actually, my husband's cousin. And I looked at and I don't think they have the gloves, no, they don't. And they've asked me, what's happened to the gloves? And I said, I thought to myself, I'm not sure, but I'm sure they were passed along to a worthy secretary or something, She would pick up, and there's a great photo we have, but it didn't make it into the planner, of her in a Georgetown gift shop, and where she's picking out gifts, and I think it's in the 40s. She was always shopping. And just, they would send it back, and of course they would be thrilled to be having this. So, yeah, she was a great gift giver.
Other questions? I saw some hands. People. Okay, so what cocktail did your great grandmother like to drink?
Sherry when she drank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone asked me that yesterday.
I'm gonna ask the question that I asked when this first came up in the neighborhood, and that was wonderful planners that you've done before and the calendars. Why did you decide to do this for the 2026 calendar? Why Eleanor Roosevelt? Why now?
Well, we were gonna do it last year. And it didn't get ready, so you wanna have an honest answer.
So it takes a lot of time to.
It did. We had a wonderful calendar. There was a lot going on last year. We did we actually issued this calendar, Women of Color in the Fight for the Vote. And so that became our 2025 calendar.
Other questions? And again, you know, after, yeah.
Hyde Park, what was the sort of movement of the family to the house in Hyde Park?
You mean like physically going back and forth
I
from?
mean,
DC?
during what period of
I
time?
was wondering what, I was assuming it's where he retired.
Yeah, so when he died, the big house at Hyde Park was, the children got together, they said, no, we don't want to maintain this big home here. So it was given at that point, and the FDR, he had established actually the first library already on the site, because it's a big property. So that was already pretty much finished, the library, knowing that he needed a place to put 12 years worth of papers. So, but the house itself is just not, it's not something that the sons' wives really, I always blame it on the sons' wives. Not fair, I'm sure. Nobody wanted at that point a house that required a big staff to run it. So it made sense to give it to the government. But my mother would spend the summers and up there and winters sometimes. So the family came and went from, while they owned it, they came and went and used that house. And Sarah Delano died in 1941. So after that, or 42, I think it was late in 41. Then it was, they used it a little bit less, but it was just, you know, and then there was Campobello to deal with, which was really remote. It's up near beyond Bangor. You go to Bangor and you keep going.
That's where the promotion.
Other questions? Yeah.
Martin, how old was she when she died?
She was 78.
70. And where is she buried?
Where is she buried? She's buried in the Rose Garden at Hyde Park, and they have, in fact, January 30th, they celebrate their birthdays. They have, West Point comes up, it's kind of fun, for his birthday, and they do their gun salute and all that. And then October 11th, they have a birthday for her, celebration and so they have one tombstone, well, two spots, and then one big stone for both of them, so.
It's a beautiful location.
Yeah. And if there are any physicians in the audience, I think we have a few. She died from a very rare form of tuberculosis, which they didn't know at the time, but she had been taking prednisone, and the prednisone released this inert, you know, tuberculosis bacillus, you'd call it, I guess. And that's what became the thing. It goes to the bone marrow. So, yeah, they didn't know how to treat it. I think it's hard to treat now. This is a very rare strain of TB. So, yeah.
When was the March of Dimes created? What year?
39. Yeah, and FDR really started that because he started that. I mean, he gave,
She played a big.
well, she supported it, but I mean, he basically, to get it started, devoted a fair amount of his inheritance to getting it started and to supporting Warm Springs.
Did they have a house in Warm Springs when he was?
He had a little White House, which is still there if you go down there, and that's their big tourist attraction, so. And they reopened it as a rehabilitation center, which is amazing.
Yes.
Okay, I think I see Pam and then
Which
Tony.
of the children was your grandmother?
Anna, the oldest. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Tony?
I thought that she had built a sort of a cottage somewhere
That's in Valkill.
in Belfield where she could get away from.
Right, and that was built in the late 20s, but then it was a furniture factory, and so there's Valkill Furniture, which is, you know, exists in just not many pieces are left out there, but there are some. But it also was created as one of the first historic sites devoted to a woman.
And so the Park Service took it over. It's just a mile or two from the FDR library. So it's part of land that he donated to her, for her to build this factory with her friends, and also the stone cottage. So they had this stone building and then the furniture factory, which is where she ultimately ended up living. And it's a bit, you can't even go on the second floor. It's not built for masses of people, but it's furnished, and it's a wonderful tour if you're ever up there. But that's the other place, yeah.
I was gonna say, again, we just finished reading The Daughters of Daughters of
Oh, you did.
And your mother or grandmother played quite a role
Mhm.
in that situation.
Right.
Very exciting.
Right, no, it's a wonderful book, yeah,
It is.
yeah. I like the British cover better than the British edition. It's written by, I think, an English woman, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I couldn't even tell you who wrote it.
Yes, her name is Cats.
It was on.
Cats.
Cass, that's right, right. Okay, that's right, thank you.
What about, there was a difference with the British edition of it?
Just the jacket. No, the inside. I just didn't like I'm sort of in a publishing background, so I'm always looking at book jackets all the time. Yeah, she was. She was really protecting his health at that point. And he was in dire situation, It was 3 months before he died. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yes. She had a townhouse in the village, right? At the end of her life?
She had an apartment on Washington Square, not a townhouse. And now her townhouse was on East 75th Street or 74, East 74th or 5th. And it's still there. It was unfortunately sold to a woman who completely renovated it, and it bizarre decoration scheme. And then she was there for 20 years, and it's been resold again, I think.
And the apartment was that in the East Village? That she had a lot of.
Yeah, she had a big apartment on East 62nd Street for a while, and then she did have this apartment on Washington Square, which I think there's a little plaque. I mean, there seems to be but yeah, but no, she was only on East 74th for about 4 years, and she shared it with the doctor, and his wife who took care of her, so.
What was her relationship with Truman?
I think it's a little testy at times. I mean, I think they got along, but I think, coming into the role he came into with very little preparation. And I think there was a sense of, here is the voice of FDR who's kind of here. And she gave him some break in time, I hope. But I do think that the whole appointment and assignment to the UN was a way, everyone's pretty sure of this, a way of getting her out of his hair. But no, I think they learned to get along. I just think that there was probably some rocky moments there where he felt like she interfered at times, or maybe offered advice when he didn't want it, that kind of thing.
Do you have any feelings about Truman's decision to use the atomic bomb?
I don't know. I think I haven't seen, it's a great question. I haven't seen any written evidence of, she didn't keep a diary. Sort of my day was kind of the diary. And do you know anything? Have you heard? Yeah, I don't think she would have registered. Again, that was a military decision. It was launched, the Manhattan Project, obviously under FDR's years. So I don't think she would have come out on record. Now, there might be some letters about this, but they haven't surfaced. So I can't answer that question. Yeah.
Anything else before we, let you all leave? So, round of applause for. Do think about, I'm gonna sell a little bit. Do think about the planners.
They're lovely, and again, Georgetown Village gets $5. And if you want to pay with cash, go see my friend Pamela.
And if
We have
want
to give the scanner. We have
You want to do it electronically? Here's a QR code. I'm gonna read it.